Hey there, I'm Sam, and today I'm going to be talking about Tome, which is a static site generator I built for Drupal. It's been out for around 4 years. This is kind of an early presentation for that, but I just wanted to get something out there because a lot of new things have been happening, and I haven't really made an update in a while. So let's talk about it. Um, yeah, it's been 4 years of working on Tome. I don't quite have a timeline for all 4 years, but this is kind of like the core development cycle that Tome went through. I started working on it in May of 2018 when it was called Virgil. Eventually, I renamed it to Tome when things got working. I thought people would know what a tome is. It's like a big book, but people thought it was an acronym. They didn't know how to pronounce it. They thought it was maybe like Japanese, and so it didn't really work out the way I wanted, but it's still a memorable name, so I guess that was good. Pretty soon after that, I launched the Tome homepage using Tome on GitHub pages. So that's pretty quick turnaround time for like a proof of concept to be in production, which is great. But as you can see, it took a while for me to actually release Tome, to get Lunar out. Lunar is a static search system for Tome. And then finally, around 2 years after development started, I felt good enough to move my personal webpage from Jekyll over to Tome. So yeah, this is kind of this initial history. It was kind of cool to map out, but the last 2 years have really been refinement and also quarantine. So I obviously have been doing all sorts of other stuff. One thing I haven't talked about in other presentations is that basically all of Tome's early development was happening while I was going through a really bad family health problem. Um, yeah, so there's a personal aspect to this too. The project has kind of become important to me because now I associate it with that time, and it helped me kind of distract myself from things and dive into a project and kind of get obsessive, which worked out for everyone else, I guess. So there's a little insight into my personal life, very small. You may be wondering from the last slides who Virgil is or what Virgil is. Virgil is the alter ego of a superhero called Static Shock. I really liked this show as a kid. It was awesome. He put a shock to your system. But after working on it for a while, I was like, people don't know this show. They don't get the static reference. Virgil doesn't make sense. It like has no relation, and maybe also like copyright issues if I want to use this character or his emblem anywhere. But that's where it comes from. So yeah, maybe I should have stuck with Virgil. I still really like that name. Love that show. You know, I went back to Virgil's repo, the original version of Tome, to see where things started and what things looked like, and it's pretty close. But one thing that's cool is the slogan in Virgil is the same as the slogan in Tome's info YAML file now, which is it's everything you need to do everything statically. Uh, and I think that's really cool and really true. It was true then and true now. Tome not only lets you generate static HTML, but it lets you generate static content for your site and have your site in Git. I think that's still such a new idea for the Drupal community. People uh, I won't say don't get it yet, but maybe haven't thought about all the things that Tome enables you to do. So I thought that was cool. I've had a very consistent message over the last 4 years and goal. And really, if we review the feature set in Tome, it seems like everything. There's a submodule for static HTML called Tome Static. For storing content in Git and other static site generators, I'm basically talking about like your markdown files. I have Tome Sync. I made a search module called Lunar that uses lunar.js, which is an awesome way to do static searches. Contact forms are working through a variety of ways, but that you can do like one-click integration with Netlify. And hosting is really figured out. It's really easy to host static sites. GitHub pages, Netlify, Render, I have there, but there's also NeoCities. It's kind of a version of GeoCities, and you can just throw everything there, and it just works. It's a solved problem, but it's still cool. Tome really does do everything. Um, so yeah, so I want to take a minute and just be happy about Tome. These are some screenshots of some real sites running on Tome. It's mostly blogs, which is totally fine. That's a normal use case for static sites. But there are some enterprise users or traditional companies using it either because deployment is weird or because they want to like iframe the Drupal site inside another site or something like that. So you can see OVH Cloud on the upper right there, I think is the main or only enterprise user. So it's cool. People are really using it, and that's awesome. So yeah, take a moment and celebrate Tome. uh, and I said before the previous slogan is still valid, but my sales pitch or whatever for Tome is still, it lets you use Drupal without worrying about cost, performance, or security. Of course, you should worry about all those things for a lot of other reasons, but it lets you use the Drupal part of it without that burden. Because that's a big problem with using Drupal for people, is that hosting providers are expensive. Even cheap hosting for providers are expensive. People don't understand there's organizations out there that cannot afford $20 a month hosting. Um, I think we're so focused on enterprise users so much we've forgotten that there's a huge hobbyist community, nonprofits, small businesses that still want Drupal, but they can't use it for these reasons. So I think this is really cool, and it's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing about Drupal being insecure or slow or expensive. It's positive because now you can use it. Um, so yeah, there's some positive affirmation. Now, all that said, Tome usage is appears to be really low. You can see on the right that according to Drupal.org, there's around 350 active installs. This statistic is calculated, as good as they can, but it isn't really like normal usage statistics. I think it's based on Composer Require or something like that. So it's probably higher than this. We can pretend it's doubled, or even pretend it's like 1,000, but that's still low for how much time I've put in and how many Drupal sites are out there. The only positive thing I'll say is that those installs are people using Tome for their site. Like, it is vital that Tome exists. It's the core of what they're doing. They're not using it like a module that adds better buttons to heroes. This is like a serious project. So that's cool. But I wanted to show this just to show that I put a lot of time into this and usage is low. I don't know, marketing, or it's hard to get started with it. There's probably a lot of good reasons, but that's how it is. My biggest module is File Browser on the bottom right there. I have 25,000 active installs, and I say a year of development. It was really like a month of development to get the initial demo out. And I care about this project, but I don't really care about this project. It kind of got shipped in less than a year, and people like it apparently a lot. So yeah, it's just, this is a good example of how what you want to do might not be what the community wants to do. So yeah, so now that we've kind of recapped a bit, I wanted to talk about new things with Tome, because things are still happening. I'm still working on it. First, this is a big one that just came out, is that you can use YAML for your content exports. You just add a little settings.php stuff. Actually, you just need this Tome sync encoder part. The other part isn't really valid anymore, but you just say, hey, Tome, I want to use YAML, and then your content gets exported as YAML instead of JSON. This is cool because JSON is not human readable and YAML is. I mean, arguably either way. But YAML also supports multi-line strings, which is really a big deal. So you can see the body text on the right. You could in GitHub edit this and add stuff there, pretty easily. So that's very cool. If you were using a Markdown sort of formatter, I'm sure writing Markdown there would be very easy too. So yeah, so that's really neat. I was happy to get that out, but it just came out, so kind of use with caution, and let me know if it breaks. I also added a user interface for cleaning up files. I won't go too deep, but there's this problem with Tome where every time you upload a file, it creates a content entity, so that's a JSON file, and it saves the file to your repo. But if you stop using that file, file usage doesn't kick in until cron runs, and even then it doesn't delete files anymore. So there's a big problem with corrupty files in Tome. That's kind of more Drupal's problem than my problem, but I made a user interface for you. So you can visit this page. It'll tell you what files it thinks you're not using, and you can clean them up before you do your git commit. That's cool. Tome project has also been really improved, kind of updated in a lot of ways, but a big one is that I made it a GitHub template, which is not very hard, but it means you don't have to use Composer anymore to create a new Tome site. You can just click this big green button and you get a Tome site. basically a new repo with the same structure but none of the history. Also, there's Gitpod support now. Gitpod is really cool. If you've heard of GitHub Workspaces, it's like that, except free. And you can edit your site with this. So I have an example config in the Tome project now, and you can like pop open Gitpod, which is basically like a web browser tab that lets you run an instance of VS Code inside a container. It's kind of my best way to describe it. But the point is, you can actually use Tome without ever doing anything locally now, which is really huge. So it's kind of like, this is kind of like groundbreaking, but we'll see if people like it. I mean, it's a big deal. You don't have to have a local environment anymore to use Tome, so it's awesome. I'll give a demo of this later too. So Lunar also supports tag style facets, basically like checkboxes. So here's an example where you can click tags. I've selected hiking and wildlife, and it'll show everything with those tags. So that works with Lunar. I'll give examples of that later, but that's cool. And yeah, finally, the big announcement is that I made an install profile for Drupal, but really for Tome users. It's called Bookish. It's released like now, today, and basically the point of it is to give you the best like out of the box experience of using Drupal to like make a blog. It's really similar to the standard profile, but with all of my kind of magic in it and a lot of cool Tome specific features. Whoa. So yeah, the slogan of this is standard profile my way. It really doesn't do much more than the standard profile, but I think it looks more modern and the editing experience is way better. So we're going to go through features, and I'll try to go really quick. I just don't want to talk about it much. So yeah, there's dark light mode support. So automatically it'll switch themes based on user preferences. You can also force darker light mode if you want, but I wouldn't really suggest it unless you really want that. I made a blur up image effect. So this is an image formatter. There's also a responsive image formatter. But basically it loads like a really low res thumbnail that's blurred. And when the image is ready, it'll kind of fade in. So that's cool. This is the same screenshot as before, but that was in Bookish. So yeah, there's static search already configured, and there's facet support. So you can click tags and search your site. So that's cool. There's code syntax highlighting. I lifted this from my site using a module I made called highlight.php or highlight_php. So yeah, you can have code snippets and they work really well. This is really hard with Drupal and always has been. I have no idea why. I also made a crazy image editor widget, which maybe I'm going to regret later, but I just didn't like the normal image experience even with focal point. So this lets you upload an image. You can choose an image style if it's within CK Editor. You can add filters. You might get the joke of how these are named. And you can basically edit the colors of your image and the crop all in like one place, which is pretty cool and useful for blogging, honestly. I made a new tagging widget using this thing called Tagify. It just is a lot better than the normal entity reference widget, and it looks better. So it's hard to describe more than that, but it's kind of like a table stakes feature. It's just this is how you expect tagging to work in any modern web app, and so that's how it works in Bookish. You can copy and paste like links to a lot of things. I think it's something like YouTube, Twitter, not Instagram, Vimeo, stuff like that, and it'll automatically embed it, which is really cool. This doesn't use Drupal Media because I just didn't need to, so it's really fast and really easy and works well with Tome. So I've also kind of lifted stuff from my personal site to configure meta tag, have a sitemap, and have an RSS feed. And yeah, it just works. I also added some meta tag magic to have like a fallback node that contains, a default image, default title, default description for pages that don't have that. For example, the search page or the contact page. So yeah, kind of hard to do yourself, and I've done it. Also, I've themed the Netlify contact form for you. So if you want to use Netlify, you can optionally turn on this submodule called Bookish Contact and have a contact form in Netlify that just works. It's free for like a lot of submissions, but then when you start paying, it is a bit a month. So your choice if you want to use it, of course. Also, I've added a client-side router called Bookish Speed. This is kind of crazy last-minute feature I added, but it's similar to the refresh list module or turbo links. Basically, when you click any link on your site, if you turn this module on, it will do a fetch instead of like actual full page refresh. So it'll use Ajax or whatever you want to call it to replace the main content of your page when you click links. It's really cool and makes your site faster, and the demo uses it, so you can click around and let me know if it's terrible or if it works well. So, yeah, we made it through. Whew, features. So, yeah, go ahead and try it, like right now. Um, there's a link there. I know you can't click it, but it exists to go to the live demo, like of the static site, but you can also use it right now. You can use Tome project to create a project. You can require Bookish, and then you can install with Bookish. I've also published all of the Bookish features in a Drupal.org module called Bookish Admin. So you don't have to use Bookish or Tome to use these features that I went through, or most of them. You can just use Bookish Admin. So I knew people would ask for that, so there you go. It's already done. It syncs from GitHub. So that's cool. And we're going to demo a way to do this in Gitpod, like right after this too. And it's all going to work. Yeah, so that was a lot. I'm kind of like wondering if I'm talking way too fast, but it's okay. I'll take a breather. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of almost end on talking about Tome ideas that I think are cool, but I don't think I'll really do anything with. So these are things you can do. One is using Netlify identity, or really any way you figure this out, to do paywalls within Tome signs. I think this is really easy. I just don't want to do that work. But basically, Netlify identity lets you log in, either with the username, password, or SSO, or something like that. I haven't used it, and restrict specific pages based on user roles. So for instance, you could make like a training service or something like Drupalize.me and gate pages with Netlify identity, but still use Tome. So it's kind of like, feels like a dynamic website, but it's really not. It's really a paywall. So it seems cool. You should do it. Another thing you could help me with is, yeah, basically create a good example people could look at for split traffic, where basically some traffic goes to a Tome site and the rest goes to like a Drupal backend, hopefully behind some sort of firewall that only allows things like views, pagers, or a specific form to be submitted. That's how I would do it. There's not a good example for this. So whether that's like frontend.drupal.com, backend.drupal.com, or actually like a proxy doing split traffic, yeah, figure it out and let me know how you did it, and I'll document it or link to your thing. Another thing is using Netlify functions. Netlify functions seem awesome. It lets you, write dynamic code that your static site can hit. So for example, you could do a static sports page and have a live feed of like the score in your Tome site. Sounds great. Yeah, try it out and let me know if you do it. And then this is kind of a weirder idea that might actually be really bad, but it's frustrating to me that entity references to things that can't be reused, like files and paragraphs, um, result in another like JSON file in Tome sync. So basically, like if I have 10 nodes and all nodes have a file, I actually have 20 entities or 20 JSON files. I have 10 nodes and 10 files. But the files are not reusable. So it'd be a lot better if you just had a node and the file was somehow normalized in line, like with that field. I do not know how this would work, but I want this, so you should make it happen. So anyway, I wanted to kind of give you ideas if you want to contribute in like crazy fun ways. So kind of more finally, I know this is a weird time to be doing anything. It feels like the world's on fire and, going from one crisis to the next. But, there is something really serious happening in Ukraine. And, I just wanted to note that and say, if you're able to help, please do it. I don't really know the best ways to help, but I can give money to causes. So I've been donating, and I just wanted to shout out or whatever some ways you can donate to. One is to this ImageX fund for Ukrainian employees of ImageX, and ImageX is a Drupal agency that's worldwide, as far as I know. Basically, it's a fund that'll go directly to the families. So a lot of the donations go to general relief, which is probably really important too. But this is something specific and in the community you can do to help out. So I've added a link there. I'll put it in the YouTube description too. And then the other donations, I'm not an expert, but there is an official website that Ukraine runs that allows direct donations. And there's a list of organizations like on a lot of websites like Forbes that say, hey, you can donate to Red Cross or all these different humanitarian funds that are working in Ukraine. So yeah, I don't want to talk too much because I'm as much of an expert as all of you. But yeah, I think we can really help, and yeah, please do. So oh my gosh, the GIF is going crazy. I'm gonna close this. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, thanks for watching. Yeah, let's keep using Tome for years to come, and please try out Bookish. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my thing is in the top right, but you don't have to. You'll just get more updates than normal. And thanks for using Tome. Yeah, cool. So I might have to edit after this if the demo goes really poorly, but we're gonna try to like one-shot demo. So hope you're ready. Let's try it. So we're gonna make a new Bookish site using some of the new stuff I talked about. Basically, we're gonna make a new repo. We're gonna open it in Git pod, and then we're gonna install Bookish. That's a lot of terms, but let's just try. So I'm at Drupal Tome project. I'm going to click use this template, and I'm going to call it delete me 2. That way I remembered to delete it. So it only takes a few seconds. This is basically equivalent to Composer Create project, but better? I'm not sure. It doesn't actually run Composer install, but it does give you a repo. So I have a repo now. Now I can go to Git pod. I've already logged in, but anyone can log in with GitHub for free. I'm going to click New Workspace, and then I'm going to type in delete me. So here's the one I just made. And it is going to spin up. This takes a bit to pull down the image, but it's okay. Construction people just pulled up outside, and it gives me time to drink water. What are the chances I can one-shot demo this? Make your bets now. Okay, great. So that's all done. What it's going to do is right away, it's going to launch a terminal window and install Composer dependencies. And then it should have actually prompted me for something, but it didn't. I'll work on that later. But I kind of worked on something that does like a cute little response that pops out. So it didn't do that, but what it would have told me is you need to install Tome with Tome init. This is a command that basically runs a site install and exports Tome content. But the point is, I've just installed dependencies. I'm going to run composer require Drupal Tome Bookish. So this will install Bookish. Great. And then I'm going to run Tome init. It prompts me for the install profile. We're going to pick Bookish. It's going to install the site. And do an initial export. If you look at the top left there, the file listing, you'll see content and files just popped in. That's from Tome Sync, export and stuff. And then let's just run a server right now and see what it looks like. So I'll go like this. Cool. You have a bookish site running. This is not a static site. This is an actual site you can log into. I mean, not you, but I can log into. So I'm gonna log in. I'll click this link. Oops. Cool, we're logged in. And yeah, you can actually edit content now because it's like real Drupal running on these people's servers. So yeah, this is bookish. I'm not going to give a whole demo because I don't want to, but we're going to do something really easy. I'm going to click help. I have a bunch of help topics I've written. The module's awesome. I'm going to click configuring your bookish site. I'm going to change the site name, and I'm going to set the site name to same site. Click save. Please work. Oh my gosh. You know, this happened before, and I thought I had a fix in. It's because run server needs to run with this argument. So anyway, live demos. Yeah. So this should work now. So anyway, let's redo just that before, just so you know I'm not like totally BSing you. It should have started a server when I started up. I'll look at that later, but we're going to change it again and save, and it just works. Okay, so run server needs like the correct URL to bind to, essentially. Gitpod does a lot of magic to make this URL bind to localhost, and it doesn't always work, so we're good. Hope I talked around that good. And I'm done. We're going to commit our changes, which there's a ton of. I almost might recommend that you do an initial commit without editing your site, just so you know, like, this is where I started with bookish and this is where I'm going, but this is like everything that just happened in this little session we've had. So you can see it exported all the config on my site and all the content. So we're going to say this is the initial commit, and we're going to push. Let's go back to our repo, and you can see it there. Now let's try to go like full on crazy demo and add this site to Netlify, which is the static host. So we're going to click import GitHub. I'm going to do delete me to search viewer. There it is. All looks good. Let's deploy it. This is when I'm like Icarus pushing my luck here. So builds take about a minute. We can watch it just for fun or to see it crash. Yeah, another thing with Tome project is that there's a default Netlify config in there now. So you don't really have to follow the Netlify tutorial anymore. If you start with Tome project, you just get this all for free, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it already did Composer install. I don't know how. Did it do that earlier? Yeah. Wow, that was fast. Installing Tome. Great. Build script success. Cool, so let's go back to the deploys, and it finished in less than a minute. That's kind of cool. And let's look at the site. There it is, Sam's site. You've got all the pages. And yeah, you've also got it still in Gitpod. So if I make a change here and commit it, it will actually redeploy Netlify because Netlify is also building on GitHub. So yeah, that's it. That mostly worked. So anyway, point of all that is that you can use Tome without using the command line at all. Not without using your local environment at all, I should say. So that's a really big deal. I think it makes it more accessible to users, and that's really cool. So that's all I have. Thanks for watching and for suffering through the demo. And yeah, I'll see you online. Thanks.